another edition of Gov Tech Today, where we try and bridge the gap between .com and .gov. I'm Russell Lowery.
And I'm Jen Saha.
And hopefully we're going to add some value to this episode because we're going to try and break down the difference of selling to the government. It's no mystery for anybody that's been in it for longer than a minute that it's different. People come to sled sales from a variety of different backgrounds, usually business to business, maybe some business to consumer sales, but government seems totally different. Is it our imagination or is it really different?
It's definitely really different. I like to think I coined the B to G because when I say that to people, they look at me like, what? But it is a market. We've done a number of episodes on the opportunities in government, and it really is different. And I think the fundamental makeup of government, the purpose of government, really makes it have to be different for a number of reasons.
You work with a lot of different clients, and I've seen some of the material that I look at, and it is all oriented for how do we meet the needs of a business-to-business sale. The description of the product, what it does, the benefits, and that may make selling to government harder because the core materials you have to rework them. If you're using the same thing, it probably betrays a lack of understanding about what it takes to sell to the government.
Yeah, I can't tell you the number of issue briefs or proof of concepts that I've told them we need to governmentize this, which it's a different mindset, a different way of thinking, especially for some of these marketing teams that are like, we've only done B2B. Like, what are you talking about?
So we're going to walk through a few of the differences, and hopefully you can help either our .com or our .gov people understand what the difference is and how it might impact the sales or the purchasing process. The big one, or one big one, is that the government doesn't have a profit incentive. How does that impact the buying and selling process?
When you look at a private business, even like ones that we operate, your goal is to make money at the end of the day. That's every business's goal. The government's goal isn't to make money. It's to serve the citizens. It has this mandated programs that it operates. So at the end of the day, I to think of government as like the world's largest nonprofit because they're aiming to zero. They don't have an incentive to make a new profit, which leads them to be incredibly risk averse and also prone to dismiss like innovative ideas or something risky where they could lose money. Ultimately, those are taxpayer dollars, and they've been entrusted as a fiduciary to spend those correctly.
It doesn't have the profit incentive. It has other incentives, and you have to understand what those incentives are as opposed to simply how's it going to help the business make money or save money. There might be some savings incentives there, but it's not the same as a profit-driven company.
Right. Government's mission is to do what's best for the taxpayer. It's not to make a profit and enrich, the pockets of our government officials. That's not where the money goes.
And part of that enriching process that you meant, it sets up alarm bells in people. And one of the things government has set up is these transparency protocols. How does transparency impact the government procurement process and make it different from B2B?
Yeah, it's certainly a mandate that I think both works to the advantage and the disadvantage of the private sector. Government transparency, FOIA at the federal level or the Public Records Act at our state level means that everything government works on that's not personally identifiable information is public, and it should be public. It's a benefit because we can do a lot of research as companies, as a private sector, when we're going in to meet with these clients. There's far more available about your government clients than there is about your business clients. So doing your homework is really important, and it's a lot easier when your homework is all posted on the internet and available to you if you know how to do a PRA, file it, wait your 20 business days, follow up on it. That's the transparency benefit that I think government allows. And it's not just how much money do they have to spend on this, but what are they going to spend money on? Who is the incumbent? What is the current contract? How much are they paying for that current contract? So there's a lot that you can glean from the public websites, from governments putting out information that just isn't available when you're doing a B2B sale.
You mentioned the transparency, and in that transparency, the government's passed different rules, regulations, response to laws that the legislature's passed and the governor signed. Those rules and regulations add another layer of complexity to it. How does that
Right.
play out?
Those are all in place to protect the taxpayer and the taxpayer's dollars. There is incredible value in them as a taxpayer, but at the same time, they slow things down. They make things a lot more complicated. Competition is mandated in the government. If I'm in a private sector, sure, I should do competition, so I make sure I'm getting the best price and the best service, but it's not mandated. If I know a guy, I can just call him and pay him to come and do some work for me. But in the government, competition is mandated. So that adds a complexity to procurements, certainly, that you don't have in the private sector. All those laws, regulations, rules add more time to that process so that when we talk about a procurement cycle in government, it's multiples longer than what a B2B type of procurement would be.
The longer a function of the rules and regulations? Because we've done episodes where you've helpfully explained to listeners different procurement processes that can speed things up. Is it risk aversion and people use the rules and regulations for a purpose, or is it incumbent and necessary according to the rules and regulations that it take forever?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all of those things, right? Government never wants to be first to try anything because when you fail in government, you're failing with taxpayer dollars. And that has a higher level of responsibility than we didn't make money for Jeff Bezos or something. So there definitely is a risk aversion where you're starting to think about how government. Do you want them to be on the leading edge and trying things that are really risky and that there is an opportunity to lose a lot of money? I don't. Those are my taxpayer dollars. So there is a risk aversion inherent in putting any of these procurements out. You'll notice government is never first to try something new. AI is a perfect example, right? It's super sexy and all the buzz in governments right now. The private sector has been doing generative AI for years. Same thing with cloud, right? Cloud migration was like the new cool thing. And I'm like, everyone in the commercial sector uses clouds already. Government hates going first because they don't want to fail, and they shouldn't fail with taxpayer dollars, but it makes them really risk averse to trying to be innovative.
It's an interesting definition of risk, and maybe it's tied to what you said earlier about the nonprofit and the incentive. But I see some of these procurements, and the terms and conditions are so onerous that global corporations sometimes don't want to participate or set up elaborate legal structures to comply with the procurement rules and regulations that are risk averse, but it winds up driving the price so that the government can't buy a computer. I can buy one cheaper going to Best Buy than the government can going through an elaborate procurement process.
Sure. Or like you hear about federal defense contracts where they're paying $1 million for a tiny little widget. And you're like, why does that make any sense? Government has also mandated policy priorities that they're trying to meet. And whether that's I'm buying from a small business, I'm buying from a US-based business instead of overseas where labor may be multiples cheaper. I need certain protections in my contract that are also driving the cost up. I want FedRAMP high data protections, 30% more. Yep, you can have that. But we as a company have had to put that all in place and institute those practices that will let us meet that level of security, and it costs more money. Any of these policy priorities that are ultimately restricting your vendor pool by saying we want to buy this from small businesses even, you're eliminating a lot of the big companies that maybe could drive down your price with volume discounts. Small businesses don't have the flexibility to do that. These policy priorities, veteran, small business, local area preferences, they're all, I think we can all agree, they're great initiatives. We love them. We support them. Small businesses are benefiting. They're the backbone of our economy. But ultimately, anything that's going to restrict your bidder pool just drives up price.
So when we're looking at those policies and priorities that are so important to the procurement process, do the businesses that sell so much to the state participate in shaping those policies, either in the legislature or in the regulatory process?
They certainly all come, those policy priorities, either from our governor or our legislature here in the state. Yes, participating in the legislative process through government relations is a great way. But look, you never want to be the bad guy that's pointing out, hey, we don't want the state to buy from small businesses. No one wants to say that. I don't want to say that. I think there's an unspoken, we're doing public good with the public money, so we're okay with it, as opposed to, this is going to drive up price, we don't want it. The state should be getting the ultimate lowest cost, and no policy priorities should be reflected in that. It is a fine line, right? Because legislators, our governor, the general public, they want the lowest cost, but they also have these policy priorities that ultimately will drive up costs to some extent. But it's something you deal with.
When you say you deal with, it sounds like both of our .com and our .gov struggle to navigate the rules, regulations, all designed to arrive at a good place for the taxpayer, but it can be a tough road to navigate.
It's a big challenge because we've mentioned the policy priorities, but they change. They change all the time. Every legislative session, something else gets thrown in there. We're going to divest in Russia, or we're going to divest in Iran, or we're going to ask all of our suppliers to pull out of doing business in certain countries. And this ultimately restricts your vendor pool, which drives prices up. And sometimes we're willing to accept that. But yeah, it makes a procurement official's job extremely difficult. They're constantly adding new forms that they want people to sign. They're adding to those terms and conditions every single year. And the vendor side of it is you've got to keep up with what those are and comply with them.
Helping a client work through a small bid. It was a $10,000 package, and there were dozens of paper signs, some of the language they didn't understand, all of that process, and explaining that there's gold in them hills, but you do have to mine through the paper. One piece that came up that makes it, I think, difficult for both sides of the procurement question is the $250,000 procurement limit for small businesses. Can you discuss how long has it been since that was changed?
It's been a decade since it was changed. I'd love to say inflation is built into it, but it's not. There are things that frankly don't belong in statute. I think that's one of them, honestly. I never want a pegged dollar amount in statute because times change. The value of a dollar changes every single year. I like the idea of giving authority to someone in the administration to be able to move that, or pinning it to something else like inflation over time. That's what the federal government does.
So these sort of policy priorities, the vendor community talks about them, the agency talks about it. The process of getting the agencies to support procurement reform seems pretty obscure. What's the venue for coming together for the community to propose a cleanup process for this to make it better for everybody?
So if I paid you $1 for every time I heard of government embarking on procurement reform, you would be an incredibly rich man, because they've tried so many times. Even if you just take a part of procurement, like we're going to reform IT procurement, it's big, it's meaty, it's difficult, and a lot of these requirements are in place because they need to be, right? I think the other thing that complicates it is our budget process. Our budget changes every year based on the priorities of the people sitting across the street and what they want in the budget. Long-term planning for this money, like you would do with a private sector business. We have 5-10-year plans. State government doesn't have that flexibility. Even within their budgets, if I want to buy something, I'll find the money within my private sector business to buy it. But government's like, hey, we needed to know that 18 months ago so we could submit a budget change proposal and work it through the legislative budget process. So changing any of these things is incredibly difficult because you are dealing with taxpayer dollars and you have all these rules and regulations, which honestly are good. Like they protect us, but the complication of them over time, even simple things like requiring wet signatures. Why do we have to do that? Is there a law that says we have to do that? And everyone said there's a law that says we have to do that. Laws can be changed. I don't think anyone should shy away from something because there is a law or it's in statute, but I'll tell you from working at a department, and you probably know the same thing. Oh man, if we have to run legislation on this, it's never going to happen. We don't have time for that process. We'll just keep collecting ink signatures because some regulation or some law says that we have to. We got to get more flexible with these things.
On that, I think we'll end the show on that. You've given us a ton of information to digest, hopefully eliminated some of the confusion. I'm not sure when you talk about long-term planning for the government that I get excited about our ability to do that. But it gives us an area to think about where we can make a meaningful difference, and maybe we can't reform the entire process completely, but we can make it a little better.
That should be our goal.